the editor, PhillyVoice.com, Evan Macy, that's one of the layers you got to go through to get this thing published, Eitan, right? You can't just walk in and hit publish and it goes out there. Someone's got to approve that. Right. So Evan joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline to discuss a little bit about this, because I think, Evan, a lot of people just wonder, I don't think people are really all that privy to how these things get done. How does Joe come to you guys and get this thing out there? What kind of vetting goes into getting this out to prove that the validity of it is accurate?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, guys. The backlash has been incredible, so I'm excited to be able to kind of talk from our side of things here a little bit. This all started back during the season. I think it may have been after the Cowboys game. It was while Carson was still playing. And Joe Santoliquito, who's in the Eagles locker room a few times a week for us, he writes features. He does a story on Malcolm Jenkins every week. He had an idea for a story, and he thought the offense had regressed under Mike Groh. Obviously, at that point, I think the Colts were playing better, and everybody had Frank Reich grit. And so he was just going to pursue that story, and he talked to some players in the locker room who told him, Groh's not the problem, number 11 is the problem. And he told me this, and I obviously, my first instinct is to not think it's true, but to be intrigued, both of which were true. And so I told him, keep in your back pocket and let me know if you hear anything else. And as the season progressed, he kept hearing more and more players that gave him, and other sources around the Eagles, who gave him more of this the take that you read in the article. They corroborated a few incidents that we put in the article, and by the time we got towards the end of the season, it almost was enough for a story. And the only issue was the Eagles had, reemerged as a playoff contender, and Nick Foles once again pulled off a December miracle. And I didn't think it was a good idea to even pursue this until the season was over. But also, the Nick Foles' success made this an even more interesting story, because it's not just why is the offense worse, it's now why is the offense working under Foles and it wasn't under Wentz. So anyway, it just kind of progressed, and then when the season ended, we kind of just started moving, and we saw some drafts, and I listened to, and Matt Mullen, who's also deputy sports editor with me at Philly Voice, we listened to some of the recordings. We saw text messages between him and his sources, and we thought that this was too good of a story not to pursue and not to put out there.
How much, Evan, when you're looking at the verbiage and the terminology that's being used in the storyline, if it's Joe looking at the quotes that he got or if it's the actual quotes that he got from players, when you examine that, and not as far as an editor vetting it, but more so as far as a sports fan familiar with what he's talking about, how much of this is all or stemming, I should say, from the field versus Carson Wentz's personality, meaning Carson Wentz ignoring a play call versus Carson Wentz shoving a guy in the middle of the hallway because he's a jerk?
Right. So I think there's a lot of misunderstanding out there. The headline we used, which we thought was a strong one, obviously creates some strong emotions. Calling anybody selfish would make you rush to judgment. And we understand that. But obviously, if you read the story, several times we go out of our way to mention that the players want Carson Wentz to succeed. Nobody was saying that he wasn't a good quarterback. Nobody was saying he wasn't a good person. The image we wanted to portray is that there's a portion of the locker room, and from what we understand, it's significant but not the majority. But we don't know. We didn't talk to all 53 players or to the practice squad. We didn't do that. But there was a contingent of people on the Eagles and associated with the Eagles who were frustrated with Carson Wentz and the way that he was playing on the field and the way that he was conducting himself sometimes with regard to his teammates. None of this means anything about Carson Wentz definitively. It doesn't mean that he's not a great guy, which obviously he is. He has a charity. Spending time in the Eagles locker room, have never seen anything to signify that there's anything wrong with him and that he's not a fantastic person. But at the same time, I see him on his best behavior for, 10 minutes every week. and then I see him on the field in post-game interviews. So I really am not privy to it. And the sources that we got were convincing enough that it was just, I don't think anybody, if they had heard this, would have just brushed it aside. We had to pursue it, and we had to write about it.
Talking with Evan Macy. He's the sports editor at PhillyVoice.com. And, one thing is, you mentioned that, Joe's got to come to you and show you all of this, proof of the stuff. You said you listened to recordings, you saw text messages, which is, pretty clear that, okay, these guys. So you mentioned, though, you didn't talk to, 53, the whole team, because I would imagine if you go to certain guys in that locker room, that blows the whole story up, right? So did they have to kind of tiptoe around, getting this information in a way that you didn't want the whole place to kind of catch on to what was going on here?
That was kind of it, and that was one of the unforeseen consequences of the article we published, which was the backlash from players who are, in my mind, I'm not going to say Team Wentz or Team Foles, but they're obviously close with Carson Wentz, obviously like Zach Ertz, like Nate Sedfeld from the quarterback room, Fletcher Cox, who's one of the veteran leaders on defense. There's a lot of people who made tweets defending Carson Wentz, and I guess the thing that we didn't really consider was that, this wasn't something that, this isn't a point of view that every player in the locker room holds. And we assumed that this was known by all of the players in the locker room, and maybe it wasn't. And the more that we think about it, the more that kind of makes sense that, you kind of have your circles of players that you see, or maybe the players who spoke out to us who wanted to get their opinion out through some media outlet. Maybe those players, didn't feel comfortable sharing their points of view with players like, Zach Ertz or Fletcher Cox, who are leaders on the team. And while that makes sense, it makes the story, I don't know if less believable is the way I want to put it, but it makes the story more shocking, and there's more decisiveness in it because of that.
Evan, was there a moment or a piece of information, and I'm not asking for anything specific as far as names, but I'm just curious if something in this story, or maybe something that you can talk about without giving up details that would jeopardize the source. Was there anything in this story that when you saw Joe bring it to you, or Joe showed you, or let you listen to whatever it may be, that you thought, okay, this is this is it? Not only is this real, not only is this legit, but we've got something big here.
There was a moment like that. I'm trying to think of the best way to answer the question without making it obvious what happened. But there was a moment like that where Joe came upon a specific piece of information, a specific source, what have you, that was just kind of like the kicker that tied everything together. And we received that piece of information. We received it last week, I think Monday or Tuesday, after the Eagles cleaned out their lockers. And I think at that point we decided that this was actually going to be a story. And up until Joe had this breakthrough, it was just kind of just something that he was working on that wasn't written on paper. It was just these sources and these pieces of material. And
really,
after we got that information, it became something that we decided that we couldn't hold back anymore.
What happens, in your opinion, as an editor, if you don't get that piece of information? Does the story not have any legs? Does it die? Does it take 6 months to come out?
I probably would have told Joe what any sports editor would have said to somebody, which is not there yet, which, we do pretty often, which isn't to say it wouldn't have gotten there, which isn't to say that it would have died. Maybe the pieces of information that he had at that point, we would have been able to use in a different way, maybe more subtly. I'm not exactly sure, but, it can't really play the what ifs. I'm not exactly sure about that.
And that's interesting because it seems that there is a lot of pieces here, but not enough until that fairly recent piece came in, right? I mean, that's essentially what you're saying. So it sounds like there was a lot here, but not enough for you to go with it until recently.
It was really the corroboration, and that's what convinced me. It was that he was hearing things in the locker room, and then we would hear one day, Matt Mullen and I, we would hear so-and-so confirmed this, and so-and-so added this to this story that we heard, and oh, this person feels the same way as this person. And it was kind of in that manner where we kind of just built a body of, I guess, confidence that this, point of view existed in the Eagles locker room.
Yeah, which, and obviously, Evan, there's been a lot of players coming out backing Carson Wentz. I don't know what the significance of that is. I mean, it's great for Carson, but I mean, personally, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I don't think that really shoots any of this down, right?
I mean, I don't take too much. What do you expect them to do? I feel like if you look at it from the player's point of view, especially if it's a player who's not involved in this story, you want your team to succeed. You don't want to have drama in your locker room. And obviously, in the age of social media, it takes a few seconds for you to rebut a story. I know Lane Johnson said something. He said #fake news. I haven't read it yet, but I'm sure it's fake. That kind of thing I don't really appreciate very much. But when you have a guy like, Malcolm Jenkins who says Carson Wentz is our quarterback, he's our leader, we're going to win, nobody in our story refuted that. Nobody said Carson Wentz shouldn't be the starter going forward. Nobody said he wasn't good enough to even win MVPs in the league. We just had people saying that the way he conducted himself or some of the incidents that they had seen, the way that they personally felt their place was in this offense, led them to want to tell us what they told us. And that's what we did. And like I said, I don't think any of the tweets that came out or the reactions do anything to disprove the story. And frankly, as somebody who's covered the Eagles since 2013 and as somebody who grew up in the Philly area, I like to see the team unity, and I like to see that they're going to overcome it.
Yeah, I think a lot of us do. And, there's always that one curmudgeon in this city, in this area, that is just going to root for pain and chaos because that's all he knows. But you're right. I think we all want that and strive for that. I'm curious, in Joe's reporting and what you've seen and anyone else, if it's Jimmy or any other, Matt, any other name that had eyes on it, was there one thing that kept coming back to Carson from multiple people, and I assume this is all football related, so that's why I'm asking, but was there one thing that just kept pissing people off that was the same thing that you noticed a pattern about?
It's nothing sexy. It's just kind of those little nuanced details about how he just didn't run the offense the same way that Nick Foles did the prior year, that he would change plays at the line of scrimmage, targeting Zach Ertz a lot more than other players thought that they should have gotten their due. And I'm not even arguing that, like, when you look at the numbers, it's kind of hard to see it, but just watching the way that Nick Foles led the offense and the way he would just kind of throw those 50-50 balls to Alshon and he would just kind of let the ball loose, Carson didn't really do that. When he went to Alshon, it was a 7-yard slant or it was an in route or it was a screen route, and it just kind of, it felt like it was more neutral. And that was kind of one of the things that was brought to our attention a lot. It was just the way that the offense was being run. And that was something that was definitely noteworthy to me. And then also the injury factor, which is really big in all of this.
Yep.
I mean, he's a human being, and he just watched his dear friend and teammate, Nick Foles, become the biggest hero that Philadelphia has ever had. And this is the guy who was the second overall pick, and he almost had an MVP season, and he wanted to get back on the field, and he wanted to. I don't hold it against him as a person, because I feel like I would feel the same way in that situation, which is to press, to try to do too much, to try to do things your own way. If the offense can you just imagine the Philly special being run by Carson Wentz? It just, I think that he probably would say, I don't want to run it. That's a play. That's Nick's play. That's always going to be Nick's play. It's just things like that where he didn't really have his own identity cemented. The whole world was completely different after Nick Foles won the Super Bowl. In my mind, that's the narrative of the story. Not enough people are asking, what did this young man go through in his mind? I mean, we know he was rehabbing from an ACL, and he ended up with that back injury. But what was he going through in his mind? I mean, I can't imagine going through what he went through, getting hurt, and then seeing this happen. And it's human. I think it's human. And I think if you read the story, you see that we're trying to paint the guy as human, and there are some teammates in the locker room who are concerned. And that's what we tried to get across. And I hope that some people took that away from it.
Evan, I need to follow up with Zach Ertz, but you just laid out exactly why I am rooting, and I am unapologetic. I don't give a damn what anybody says. Your Eagles, my Eagles, our Eagles got a Super Bowl last year. But it's the same exact reason, or the very reason, why I'm rooting for the Eagles, for the Patriots in the Super Bowl, because I don't know what's going to happen to Carson Wentz if back-to-back years he goes from watching Nick Foles beat the Patriots to the kid who was drafted one slot ahead of him beat the Patriots. Meanwhile, he's hurt on the sidelines, unable to do anything. So just for his mental sanity, I'm rooting for the Patriots.
It's crazy. The last 2 years are stranger than any piece of fiction you could imagine. It's just bizarre the way things like this work out, but I totally agree with you.
Evan,
I also
real quick,
do not like the Patriots.
I understand, and that's what's so difficult. One criticism that I understood, and listen, about 99% of it, including the belligerence and the nonsense of people hiding behind keyboards, I'll never understand and never condone on any level. But there was one thing that caught my eye and raised an eyebrow where people were discussing on social media, and I wanted to bring that up to you because I don't think that enough people, meaning outside of Joe, have had an opportunity to address, not even defend, but address this. The thing about Zach Ertz and the discussion that he got the ball way more than with Wentz than with Nick Foles, people on Twitter, and I know you've seen this, have said, hey, how come Joe didn't put the stat in there that kind of disproved that specifically with Foles and Carson throwing the ball to Ertz? Was that something that you guys didn't put in on, like, knowingly, or was it something that you just didn't feel fit the story?
It's one of those, I guess bad facts might be the way to put that piece of information. I think it's undeniable for anybody who watched this team that Carson Wentz, I don't want to say over-targeted, but he went to Ertz, in my opinion, and I'm unbiased. I love Nick Foles as much as anybody. It looked like he forced the ball to Zach Ertz. That was just what it looked like from the eyeball test. The statistics, at least proportionally for Wentz, back that up. If you look at Foles' targeting, I guess it is a similar number, and that's something that would have been very easy to once the story was up, I didn't want to put a single period, a single change to it. I wanted to put it up and let it be there. That's just something that I feel very strongly about, because if you're going to stand by it, you don't want to make tweaks to it. That would have been an easy fix. If that's, in my opinion, if that's the biggest thing that we messed up, then I'm okay with it.
It's a great point.
But I think that the eyeball test is something that he was trying to talk about, and I think that it's legitimate. That maybe the argument would have been versus last year as opposed to this year, because once you come off of an ACL and you have a lot of new players in your locker room and a different offensive coordinator and a different quarterbacks coach, it makes sense to me that you're going to go to Zach Ertz as much as possible, because Zach Ertz is awesome.
Right.
But the point we were trying to make is that it was at the detriment of other offensive players who were telling us that they felt like Carson Wentz was not seeing them because he was not going through his progressions. He was looking for Ertz. That's what we heard, and that's what I saw. And it may be up for debate. I'm not Carson Wentz, and I'm not in that quarterback's room, but that's what we were trying to say.
Evan, there was a lot of explosive comments through here. Were there other explosive comments that you didn't feel comfortable running with?
As far as things that players were...
Yeah, just stuff that maybe Joe brought to you and you just said, you know what, I can't go with that. Like, I mean, was there more... I mean, there's some big-time comments in here that you kind of raise your eyebrow like, man, this guy really has it out for him. But was there other things that you just didn't feel comfortable kind of going with?
The problem is that a lot of the information we had was this raw information where we knew everybody who was involved in every particular thing that was talked about. So the difficulty was we had a variety of incidents, and the one that comes to mind that Joe talks about is after the Saints game when Doug Peterson gave a speech about accountability, and one offensive player sat there silently because, from what we hear, he was very unhappy with Carson Wentz. We know who that player was. And there are other things like that were harder to hide the identity of the players. And the most important thing for us and for Joe, who does this for a living and who has personal relationships with the people he talked to, is, you know, when you see a report from Woj, when you see a report from Adam Schefter, those are based on anonymous sources. And we took a lot of flack for using anonymous sources. And that's the most frustrating thing to me about all of this, because none of sports journalism really works. Because if people don't have confidence that you're going to keep their name secret, they're never going to tell you the truth, because of the way that things go and the way that it's a really short lifespan in the NFL, and the way that you never know when your career is over. You never know when you make a comment that's going to get you in trouble. So there were a lot of things that we didn't use because we didn't want any specific names to be in there. We went out of our way to protect the players as much as we could.
Did this kind of manifest to the point where there was a group of quote-unquote sources that were like, listen, if this guy's going to get something out there, I'm going to take my opportunity to get something off my chest? Were like people volunteering information, or did Joe kind of have to really scratch and claw to find guys who wanted to be, you know, a part of this?
You know, I wish I could answer that question, but Joe's, you know, on the Eagles beat. He's in the locker room. He's talking to who he talks to, and whenever he had something that was an interesting nugget of information, he brought it to our attention. So I'm not exactly sure. All I really know is about the first source came from him asking about Mike Groh, and then the sources subsequently came about him talking about what that first source had told him. So I don't know exactly if there was a buzz in the locker room. I think it was, in my opinion, it was just kind of Joe talking to people casually, getting information, then going back to them saying, if I don't give your name, can I use this? Can I get you on the record saying this? And he did, and that's what we went with.
Hey, last one for me, Evan. I just wanted to sneak this in there. How much discussion did Joe have outside of Philadelphia? I know league sources were mentioned in this, and how much of that came and factored into this report as opposed to what was happening this year inside the building? Not that it devalues or decredits anything. I'm just curious.
Are you asking about sources that aren't Eagles players? Is that what you mean?
Yes, meaning like how much. So I am asking as a radio host, not as a reporter, but I've seen stuff because I'm ignorant. So I've seen a lot of times where something can be confirmed with a league source, or you go, everybody has their league, and it's such a broad term, right? I mean, it could be an equipment guy, or it can be the assistant general manager to a team. So I'm just curious as far as how much Joe had interaction with this story and this type of feel of Carson Wentz, and if anybody around the league was aware of it versus just, hey, this is something brewing inside. You know, like Aaron Rodgers, other quarterbacks, you start to hear things from people around the NFL. I don't know if it got to that point with Carson Wentz before Joe came out with the story is my question.
I know that all the information we went off of was from inside the locker room, but I also know that we had corroboration from league sources from other places. And that's really I guess the best that I could put it to answer your question, is that there was an involvement, but we didn't, you know, nobody's going to really know what's going on in the locker room outside the locker room. So.
No, but and that's what I meant. Like, I didn't mean to take away from what Joe found or the story itself. If anything, it might add more credibility to it if and again, I'm just throwing something out there, like a player who knows a player who's been quoted, or a player who's played here, or anybody who's familiar with this organization. That's all I meant. Like, not in the sense to take away or detract, but if anything, add more validity to it.
Yeah, Joe worked the phones, and like I said, we saw text messages from people who gave us information, who were not a current Eagles player, and that definitely gave us more confidence in it. As far as how deep that goes, how widespread it goes, I'm not exactly sure. I know what I saw. I know there were other people that he talked to too. He you know, people are really giving Joe a hard time, and he put a lot of work into this, and he talked to a lot of people before we were willing to put anything on paper or in an article.
Yeah. Evan Macy, editor at PhillyVoice.com. We appreciate you kind of give us a little insight on how a story of this magnitude kind of, is born, and then, some of the work that you guys do behind the scenes to get things out there. Check it out. Exclusive sources inside the Eagles paint Carson Wentz as selfish, uncompromising, and playing favorites. Joe Santoliquito is the author. Evan Macy is the editor. Thank you, Evan.
Great stuff, Evan.
No problem, guys. Have a good one.